We are going to shift our focus to our discussion of energy. Again, I'm hoping some of this is a review for you from physical science. We are going to discuss a little bit about energy. We're going to talk about the laws of thermodynamics and then relate it to our energy flow in ecosystems. So when we think about energy, we typically break it down into two categories, whether it's kinetic or potential energy. And we know kinetic energy is the energy of action or motion, the energy of movement. When we talk about potential energy, we're talking about stored energy. Okay, energy, for example, that's held in bonds between atoms. When we break apart those bonds, energy is released and we have kinetic energy. So we can have stored potential energy in our bonds. We break it apart, we release energy. We say that's kinetic energy. Typically, we think of it as almost like a dam of water. A reservoir of water would be a stored potential energy. When we release that water from the dam, it's converted into kinetic energy. All right, the energy of action or movement or motion. We have two laws of thermodynamics that are going to be important to us in our discussion. The first law of thermodynamics states that there is no net gain or loss of energy. It is just converted to another form. It is also called the law of conservation of energy, and that's a good way to remember it. It sounds a lot like the law of conservation of matter that we discussed earlier, where we said matter is neither created or destroyed. It's just changed to another form. Well, in a similar way, we say that energy functions similarly. Not the same, but it's similar. There is no net gain or loss of energy. It's just converted to another form. So that is a relationship that's similar, but there is something very different that we'll get to shortly. The second law of thermodynamics states that some unusable energy is lost to heat. And I use that word lost carefully, okay? Because I don't want you to think that it is lost and poof, it's gone out of nowhere, okay? But during a reaction, okay, it's not going to be 100% transfer, okay? You're not going to lose the energy. It's just that energy transfer is not perfect. It's not 100%. Okay, during that reaction, some of it is going to be removed as heat. Okay, so for example, you consume a lot of pasta and you're going to be running a marathon. Well, you know that not all of that energy that you consumed is going to go to your muscles is going to make you run. All right, some of that you're going to radiate from your body as heat, and that's a pretty good example of that. It doesn't mean the energy is gone from our whole system, okay? I mean like around us, our whole system. It just means that it's not a perfect transfer. Some of it's going to be removed. It's not going to go to our muscles. It's going to be sweated out. It's going to be released to our atmosphere as heat. It's still energy, it's still conserved, it's just a different form. Okay, and that's an important part of the laws of thermodynamics. I want to make sure that you understand. When we think about putting together or breaking down our compounds, like I said earlier when we talked about kinetic and potential energy, when we break down compounds, boom, we break them apart. All right, energy is released. Energy is stored in bonds. So when we take glucose, C6, H12, O6, and we break apart those carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, the energy comes out of there, and we can use it to run, for example. When we put compounds together, like in our body, we need to heal and build new cells, okay, or build new matter in our body. We need to build new muscle, okay? Build new skin, okay? When we're building compounds, well, guess what? We need to use energy to do that. So we actually have to restore it. We have to put it back together, and that takes energy to do that, okay? Just think of it as, building something. It's going to take energy to do that, and then it's going to be stored in there. Okay, that hopefully is a good way to think about it. So let's talk about how energy flows in ecosystems, because it's not going to be the same as matter flowing in ecosystems. Matter, we said, is recycled. So when we thought about that flow of matter through our ecosystems, we said we have like the producer and the consumer, and we have those materials getting consumed and then released from our bodies, or dead organic matter, and then the decomposers take in those nutrients and they recycle nutrients back into the soil that's then taken back up by the plant. So we see this recycling on Earth of matter. Okay, it's not created or destroyed, it's just recycled. Well, energy is a little bit different. When we talk about energy flow in ecosystems, it doesn't work the same way. And the reason is because energy flow really begins with the sun. Okay? Think about it. When we are bringing energy down to Earth's surface, it's coming down in the form of sunlight energy. And who's taking that up? The producers, the autotrophs. They're using photosynthesis. They're absorbing that sunlight energy, that carbon dioxide, that water, and they're producing their stored energy, glucose, that sugar, and they're releasing oxygen in the process. We say the sun is a non-polluting and non-depletable source of energy. All right? People ask, well, is the sun always going to be around? Well, as far as we can tell in our lifetime, yes. But again, if the sun's not there, we have no plants, and therefore we have no organisms. So we think of it as a constant, a non-polluting, and non-depletable source of energy. Our consumers, when they absorb that incoming solar energy during photosynthesis, they really don't take in that much of that light energy that's hitting Earth's surface. Only about 2% of what's coming down is going to come into a plant, okay, during photosynthesis. Okay, remember that I have up a very simplified photosynthesis reaction. I don't have it balanced, but just to give you an idea, we see our carbon dioxide on the left side of our equation, our water, and our light energy. And all of those things come together to react to form glucose, which is at C6H12O6, and that oxygen that is a waste product of the photosynthesis reaction. So we see the sunlight energy originating at the sun, coming down to the producer level, okay, the autotroph that can take that light and other molecules like carbon dioxide and water, and converting it into that chemical energy of glucose, C6H12O6, okay, in that process. We know that plants use glucose to really drive everything that it needs to do. It's stored chemical energy, and that energy can then be broken, be released and used for plant growth, plant repair, plant, to produce toxins if it needs to avoid predation. It can be used for reproduction, to produce spores, to produce seeds, to produce fruits, stamen, anthers, plant parts, flowers, fruit. Okay, all of those different things. Plants are very busy, and they need a lot of sugars to do all those processes all day long, all the time. When we think about the productivity or primary productivity, we're really talking about the amount of photosynthetic activity in producers. Okay, how much photosynthesis is really going on? And when we talk about gross and net, most of us kind of know that. If you've ever gotten a paycheck, we think about, oh, my gross is going to be, I'm going to get paid $10 an hour. Yay, okay. So at the end of the week, if I work 20 hours, I should get $200. I can do a lot with $200. So, super. But at the end of the week, when I get paid, my check isn't $200. My check is somewhat less than that. And we call that your net pay. Okay, and that's often our first paycheck is a little bit of a shocker, because there are some things that come out during, along the way. Okay, there are deductions. Okay, so we can look at it from like a money sense. When we're talking about photosynthesis, we say the gross is the total amount of photosynthetic activity in producers. That total amount that they're doing. They have their leaves out, they're collecting, the chloroplasts are busy, they're collecting light. Okay, they're taking in their nutrients, they're taking in their water, they're doing all their stuff to photosynthesize, but they have to do something with that. Okay, they have to do something with that. So the net primary productivity is the gross, okay, minus what is used up by the plant. Okay, remember, the net is just going to be kind of the balance of that. Remember that the plant needs to do a lot of activities. We talked about all of them. Reproduce, spores, plants, seeds, make new roots, grow. All those things take up energy. Okay, they take up energy. So your net is just going to be what's left over after it does all those things. It's the gross minus what's used up by the plant. All right, there's only going to be so much left over for later, okay, or go into its biomass, okay, into its growth. Okay, only the net, what's left over, can be passed on to the next trophic level, or that primary consumer. Okay, we estimate that only about 10% of energy goes into the growth of the plant. Therefore, only 10% of energy is passed to the next trophic level. So we say that about 90% of it is used up by the plant, okay, to reproduce, okay, to produce a toxin so it doesn't get eaten. Okay, all of these things take energy, but the only thing that can go to the consumer is what actually goes into building its body and making it bigger. And we say that only about 10% of that energy goes into growing the plant body, and therefore only that 10% is passed on to the next trophic level. This takes us back to our biomass pyramid that I had up earlier. You can take a look at, where we see that 1,000 kilocalories at the bottom, then 100 kilocalories at that grasshopper level, 10 kilocalories at the secondary consumer or the rodent level, and then 1 kilocalorie. Remember, calories are a measurement of energy. So the producer level had 1,000. Well, guess what? That primary consumer only had 100 because of that 90% used up energy just for daily processes. Okay, we can look at our own bodies. If we took 100% of things that we consumed and put it into biomass, into our bodies, we would be humongous. Okay, but we can't, because we put very little as adults into our body. Most of it we use to get up in the morning, to eat, to drive to school, to get on the bus, to walk to school, to think all day, to run around at PE, to do whatever you're going to do. Okay, we're very busy. To play your sports, to play your instruments, to do everything that you do takes energy. Right? Even eating, digestion, breathing, heart beating, all those things take energy, and those are not passed up. Okay, as we get older, okay, we put less into our body as time goes on. Okay, when we're kids, when we're babies, and we're growing really rapidly, clearly we put more into growth than when we're older. Okay, if we put 10% in, we'd still be getting bigger and bigger. We know that as we get older, we kind of energy in, energy out to maintain the way that our bodies are. Another way to look at the energy flow is in this diagram, where you'll see that ratio, that 10-to-1 ratio, or that 10% transfer of energy up our food chains or our food webs. So you'll see here it says lower trophic levels generally contain more organisms, biomass, and energy content than higher trophic levels. The 10-to-1 ratio shown here is typical but varies greatly. Now, so if we start with 1,000, for example,
okay, units in the producer level, you'll see that that diminishes by 90% and only 10% will be transferred to that primary consumer level, which is 100, and only 10% of that will transfer to the secondary consumers. 90% of the energy will be used up by the grasshopper, for example, and therefore that rodent will only receive 10%. And then that high-level tertiary consumer, that bird of prey, for example, will only receive 10% of that. So this is why we see our food chains and our food webs very short. Okay, you don't really see us get much higher than a secondary or tertiary consumer because of that diminishing energy as we move up the food chain or the food web. Now, like it said it varies greatly. Okay, think about it. Obviously, when we think about certain organisms, they're going to put a lot more energy into growth when they're small, when they're growing. When they reach adulthood, they're going to use a lot of their energy for different purposes, okay, for reproductive purposes, etc. Things that don't build biomass. So, when organisms are very young, they might put, 40% of their energy into growth and, maybe 40 or 50% into the other bodily processes that are going on, breathing and heart beating and all the other things that our bodies do as organisms. And, again, only a little bit of energy is going to be transferred. Obviously, at that younger level, it's building the biomass, so more of it's going to be getting into the body, and then therefore more of it will be transferred to that next trophic level. Okay, as we move into our consumer level of our trophic structure, the same idea applies. Okay, these organisms, like us, are going to need energy for growth, maintenance, and repair. We're going to need to break down our food in the process of digestion, which is one thing that takes energy. And it's a range because, again, it depends on what stage you are in life, depends on what the organism needs. But about 60 to 90% of our food that we're ingesting is going to go to our energy, okay, all the things that we need to do all day long in our lives. And about 10 to 40% is going to stay in our body tissues. Clearly, when we're infants and we're growing rapidly, a higher percentage of that is going to go into our body tissue for growth. But as we get older, less of that's going to happen because we're going to take most of that energy and we're going to be using it, okay, for everything we do in our daytime. We cannot possibly put that much energy into growth, otherwise we would just be growing out of control. All right, keep in mind that our second law of thermodynamics says that there's going to be some waste heat, that those energy conversions are not going to be perfect, they're not going to be 100%, and throughout that process we do produce waste heat in the form of body heat from our bodies during all of those conversions that happen. Our last category, we know our decomposers, our bacteria, our fungus, our termites, etc., our worms. These organisms, we know, break down our dead plant and animal matter, the organic matter, to release nutrients used by producers. Clearly, if you have a compost pile, it does often steam because those organisms are decomposing. They're respiring to get their energy, and there's some release of heat during that process due, like we said, to that second law of thermodynamics. All right, keep in mind that I said before that matter is recycled, but energy flows in one direction, okay, from the sun through our trophic structure to our producers, our consumers, our decomposers. But remember, decomposers do not resend energy back to the sun. This is not a cyclical process. It is not a recycled process like matter. I put this slide in the PowerPoint just as a reminder. Remember, nutrients or matter are recycled in ecosystems, and energy flows in one direction, starting at the sun and going through all the trophic structures and not going back again up to the sun. Your book has this image in it that I think is a really good way to kind of look at them side by side.
And B, the first thing that we talked about, matter cycling within the ecosystem. You'll see the producers there at the bottom, the grass, harnessing a light energy, etc., producing that glucose, those elements, bringing them together, going into the consumers. You'll see a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary consumer there. That material, that matter, being broken down, whether it's a dead animal or their waste, the detritus or the decomposers. Detritus, generally we think of that as plant or woody material, and detritivores basically breaking that down, and then obviously the decomposers breaking down, for example, animal matter. And again, all those nutrients, when they're broken down, are released back into the soil and are reabsorbed by producers. So you'll see that nice cycling of matter there on the right side of your screen. On the left side, we know that energy, again, flows in one direction. It's not recycled. It starts at the sun. It comes down. The producers harness that sunlight energy. It is, again, transferred, depending on what percentage, up the trophic level. And again, during that transfer, it's not perfect energy conversion. Some of it is released as heat along the way. You'll still see your primary, secondary, and tertiary consumer. In this diagram, you'll see those orangish red arrows, and that's kind of showing that waste heat that's released during all of those conversions between those different levels of the trophic structure. Then you'll see it going again. The detritivores and the decomposers are going to get energy from there, and again, in that process, releasing some energy as heat, this one-way flow, and you don't see that recycling back anywhere to the producer like before. You don't see that because that's not the way that it works. We're talking about the movement of energy here, and that energy is not recycled back to the sun. It's still conserved, but it's not recycled.